ॐ न सदासीन्नो सदासीत्तदानीम् नासीद्रजो नो व्योमा परो यत् किमावरीवः कुहकस्य शरमन्न अम्भः किमासीद् गहनम् गभीरम् न मृत्युरमृतन्दरहिना रात्र्या अन्न आसीत् प्रकेतः आनीदवादग्गस्वदया तदेकम् तस्माद्धान्यन्न परः किञ्चनासा तम आसीत् तमसा गूढमग्रे प्रकेतम् सलिलग सर्वमा इदम् तुच्छेनाभ्यभिहितं यदासीत्.
Hello everyone. Today we have with us our distinguished guest, Professor Surjit Kaur Chahal. She was working in the Department of Philosophy, Savitribai Phule, Pune University for around 35 years. She retired as a head of the Department of Philosophy. So let us have a conversation regarding philosophy with her. Madam, we would like to know about your educational background first.
I started as a science student. I wanted to do medicine. And when I used to do my experiments in interscience, experimenting on animals was the worst thing for me. It used to disturb me a lot. I used to feel that these animals have life in them, and just for the sake of studying, we are dissecting them. It used to really disturb me. So by the time I finished my interscience, I decided this is not my field which I would like to go into. So then that questioning attitude, the study of human nature brought me to psychology. But while I was doing psychology, I found that it was more a factual study, and I was more interested in value-based study. So then that's how I shifted over to philosophy.
So what is that which which attracted in philosophy?
It is actually the values, the questioning attitude, and especially the values of the society which were prevalent. As I told you, I moved into philosophy because, and I left science because it disturbed me experimenting on animals. So the way we used to look at animals, the way we used to look at plants, I was not very comfortable with. And also I had a background in religious philosophy. And in Sikhism, we do not accept that animals are given to us to use them as we feel like. So I felt that I need to study in depth human relationship with animals, with the environment, and also human values. So that's how I came into philosophy.
Yeah, madam, now you also worked in the Department of Philosophy for 35 years almost. So which papers you taught and which you enjoyed teaching in the Department of Philosophy?
See, as I told you that I was interested in studying human nature also. So I actually initially took up courses which were like philosophy of science, philosophy of mind. These were the papers that interested me. Philosophy of social science, natural science, philosophy of religion. Slowly, when I read these papers, I felt that we need to integrate these values and look out for newer or a re-look at the values of society that we are having. So that's how I started studying philosophical psychology, and when I started teaching, I even introduced the course. Earlier we had only philosophy of mind, which was a very basic course. I introduced philosophy of mind at advanced level, which was philosophical psychology, where we studied cognitive science and consciousness at a deeper level. And again, in philosophical psychology, also things that were introduced is a study into the nature of consciousness, how quantum mechanics can really help us to study this. So these were the things that I tried to introduce. Another course that I tried to introduce during my tenure in the department was a course on philosophy of environment, which we introduced, students got interested, then it was taught at a higher level also. So 3 semesters, philosophy of environment, environmental ethics, and then sustainability.
Yeah.
These were the issues that were studied at 3 different semesters. Since I was married to a doctor, I was even faced with medical issues. And slowly, when I was doing genetic engineering and values related to genetic engineering, I found that genetic engineering was found to be very acceptable in the medical science. So I thought that I should do research and see whether there are any ethical issues related to genetic science, and can we really accept genetic modifications, at least in the medical field. So I started studying medical science from this perspective, and I even wrote a book on redesigning genes, and then of course my interest into medical ethics grew.
So it seems that you are inclined towards the applied part of philosophy. So what made you think, or what actually motivated you to go to the applied part of the philosophy? Because most of the time people are really enjoying the the core philosophical, like metaphysical discussions, or like in analytical philosophy a lot of logical discussions are there. But then why you, I mean, what is the real motivation or thought behind going towards the applied philosophy?
I did get interested in core philosophy, but what I felt was that core philosophy was not the only thing that we need to study. What we need is application of this philosophy into the other fields. And I felt that we cannot just do philosophy in ivory towers. We need, whenever I would, being in the army, we used to have parties, and whenever I would go to a party, people would ask me, what are you doing? I would say, I'm teaching philosophy, or I'm a philosophy researcher, or whatever. So they would say, oh, so we cannot really communicate with you. They felt that we are in ivory towers. And I felt that we need to bring about a change in the thinking. We need to bring philosophy to the grassroots levels, and we need to communicate with people. And that would be only possible when we start bringing philosophy to common man and try to resolve a common man's issues. And that's how I felt applied philosophy was necessary.
That's interesting, because whenever we also encounter with the people and the questions about the philosophy, then they just raise their eyebrow and they drop the discussion. So it's definitely very helpful.
They feel that you are somewhere very different and
very alien sort of.
alien.
So yeah, that's really great about it. Now let's move towards your area of research and your area of expertise. So what would you like to tell about your area of research?
My interest started with philosophy of science. I moved on to philosophy of environment. I was given a career award by UGC in 1979, and I worked on this area of philosophy of environment, and I wrote a book to Environment Towards a New Paradigm. And what I was meaning by a new paradigm was, let's look at the environment as having values, even though it does not have interests. So I worked on the interest theory of rights, and I saw that always rights do not mean that something has a right only if it can take interest. So environmental philosophy was my area of work and research. Then after that, when in the department we were given the DSA second phase, I took interest in genetic engineering. Again, I started with the environmental perspective, that what will be the impact of genetic engineering on the environment. But then I found that it's not only having an impact on the environment, it seems to be quite acceptable in the medical field, especially gene therapy. But then gene therapy ke saath what I found is that genetic engineering is also being used for genetic enhancement. So this is where I felt that we need to really, as philosophers, take interest in these issues, because the medical science thinks that we need to do research and that's it. We don't need to be concerned about values. And I felt that if genetic modifications are allowed without any deterrent, and if medical scientists and environmentalists keep working on genetic modifications without any values, it is going to create havoc in the society. So that's how my interest in genetic engineering, its ethical impact, and then slowly, the impact of genetic engineering in the medical field. And today, it's not just genetic engineering. I'm more interested in issues of medical ethics which are dealing with terminally ill patients. So I'm more inclined towards that type of research.
So, I mean, you are, I mean, working now on bioethics and the related areas. That's interesting, because today the environment is a very big issue, and a lot of catastrophes we have started facing. So definitely facts and values should be combined, and from that point of view, it's really interesting. So have you written books on bioethics also?
Yeah, I've also written a book on bioethics, that is Redesigning Genes. The Sikh perspective I wrote, in which I took up not only the Sikh perspective but even the medical perspective. Then after that, I have also written books on conflict resolution. So like, especially in the UNESCO publications, I have articles in which how do we resolve the global crisis, global conflicts. And this I specially took up because I was invited to the International Philosophers Meet in 2012, and there the Gulf War and the way the Muslim community was being looked at, and as if, they were all wrong. So that was the time when at that International Philosophers Meet, there was more interest in Asia-Arab dialogues. So in that Asia-Arab dialogues, I presented the Sikh perspective of global peace, how we can bring about global peace, which has also been published subsequently in the e-book as well as in the UNESCO hard copy publication. Then I have also been interested in organ donation, and I have not been interested in organ donation only theoretically but practically. I have been going to different forums and trying to propagate the need and the necessity for organ donation, and the necessity for all of us to voluntarily donate our organs and even sign up when we are fine and sane, that in case of any calamity occurring, especially cases like brain death, that I should not be kept alive at all costs, rather my organs should be donated. Because that concept of seva or service to the other should be coming in the forefront, and even if my organs need to be donated, especially at a time when my living is just a futile living. So that also has been published in a UNESCO publication. Then after that, as I told you, I got interested in the terminally ill cases. So there is a series of articles in a book published by Oxford University Press, which has been edited by Mark Lesenby, in which I have written the Sikh perspective on terminally ill cases. There are a series of articles in that book, 5 articles in that book. The title is Safe Passage.
Yeah. You just mentioned that palliative care and terminally, in relation to the terminally ill patient, and there are also conflicts occurring many a times. So can you focus, light on those issues, especially related to the Indian context?
See, what I feel is that when we talk about palliative care or when we talk about euthanasia, this has a very different implication in the East, especially in the Indian tradition and in the Western tradition. In the Western tradition, euthanasia is being accepted. There are some places where Catholics do not accept it, but the others are tending to accept it. And palliative care is normally designated or given to institutions and organizations where palliative care is given, or we call it, earlier it was called as hospice. But today, or rather should I say, in the Indian context, palliative care is not merely by the healthcare providers and the doctors or the physicians who are in charge, but also family, society, community. Now by community I mean especially the religious community. That plays a very important role. And I find that even atheists towards the end of their life, and end means when they are terminally ill, they tend to be really looking forward to someone coming and praying for them, community prayer, prayer healing. So I feel that we need to really work on these issues, and a philosophical understanding of these issues will help us to provide better palliative care to the patients and not leave them at the mercy of just the physician who's attending.
So in India, actually, this area is yet to be explored, I think, the palliative care, because in certain diseases only there is a facility of palliative care, like in case of cancer. So that type of care is provided, but in many cases we can extend our help as far as the palliative care is concerned. So this have you conducted any courses, workshop in the department?
Yes, I have organized international seminars. First, in the year 2012, I conducted a UNESCO supported bioethics workshop in which we discussed 5 different terminally ill cases, and out of these 5 cases, 3 cases were taken from the army background, like during wartime, what type of situations they come across which the soldiers face, and how are those cases handled by the doctors. The doctors provided us with the factual information and the difficulties and how they handle these cases, and there were senior doctors like General Harinder Singh, Brigadier Y.D. Singh, then the commandant of M.H. Karki, who presented these cases, who discussed these cases, and then after that we even had a philosophical discussion on this. Okay. So for that philosophical discussion we had Dr. Maser, who was the head of the Asian part of UNESCO. Then we had Dr. Jasdev Rai, who is actually from UK, but he is more inclined towards the Asian thinking. He's a practicing doctor there. And then of course we had our own people from Pune, teachers from Pune and the other states.
So it was sort of a totally interdisciplinary sort
where
of
we had people, doctors from the army, doctors from the civil, philosophers, then doctors from out of the country, and also philosophers from out of country. Along with that, I also organized another thing which I'll come up, that was the ethics of clinical mediation. I'll discuss about that.
Okay, so now we would like to know that currently on what you are actually working, on which area you are.
See, what I feel is, as a philosopher, what I have gained is basically reaching out to the common man. Now, when I'm reaching out to the common man, what I feel is that usually people are faced with conflicts. And these conflicts could be either interreligious, they could be political conflicts, they could be social conflicts, they could be family conflicts. So I am more inclined towards using my philosophical background for conflict resolution. Now, when we are trying to resolve conflicts, I feel mediation is the best way of doing philosophy and using our philosophical training to resolve conflicts. So that's exactly what I'm doing. And
can you just give an example of what I mean? What do you mean by mediation, and what type of the for example you can give?
Now, see, when we talk about mediation, you and I, we are having a conflict, for example. Now, one way is that we suppress one another. We dominate and we suppress one another. So for some time, maybe our conflict seems to be resolved, but it's a skin deep resolution only. The moment I'm scratched, once again my conflict comes up. It is like something is boiling in a pot and I put a lid on it. Now that type of conflict resolution is not a resolution. And this could be done by one party being dominant, so it would be more of a parent-child relationship. Or it could be a third person who says, I'm trying to mediate, and that third person who's mediating could really be actually having two attitudes. One could be, I have resolved, or I'm trying to resolve your conflict. Second attitude could be, I'm trying to help you resolve your conflict. Now what we require in what is mediation is, I help you resolve your conflict. So the person is not having a dominating role. He is more trying to help you, and here Rawls' position comes into the picture, wherein Rawls expects us to do self-reflection, and we have a contract. Now what do we mean by a contract? I have to come back and you have to come back. If I say I maintain my stand and you say you maintain your stand, that's not going to ever resolve our conflict. So I need a self-reflection, and that's what is mediation. Mediation is a self-reflection. Mediation is an impartiality. I need to look at your problem from your perspective, and you need to look at my problem from my perspective. Only then there can be some resolution.
Will take place.
And in order to get training rather, in mediation, I had organized, while I was in the department, I organized an international, it was more of a workshop, which is actually equivalent to a course in the University of Pennsylvania. They have a full course on clinical mediation. The same teachers were called here, and Professor Bergman, he came and conducted this course on clinical ethics mediation. He trained us, he actually gave us cases and made one person a patient, one person as a doctor, one person as a mediator. So 4 or 5 people like that were, made to do role play. And then we would speak up, we would play the roles, and he would correct us that this is not what a mediator should do, this is not what a nurse should do or a patient should do. And this course that we did, we were all awarded a degree, a certificate of University of Pennsylvania. So I think this was, I'm not aware, but I think this was one of its kind in the department and even maybe in the university, because a course which is taught in University of Pennsylvania was done over here, and we were given the certificates of University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, this conflict resolution is really an interesting area, because in our society we find there are so many conflicts in family also, in parent and child, in-laws basically in most of the cases, and in colleagues also we have so many conflicts. So that's really everyday problem, and that's really going to be helpful for people. So I would like to ask you about the significance and the relevance of studying philosophy in present scenario.
As I was telling you, that mediation and conflict resolution, I feel, is a very big role that philosophy can play. And when we are playing this role, we should not have this rescuer syndrome that I am trying to resolve the conflict. We have to make the people involved try to resolve the conflict. And I found that this is there not only here. This sort of conflicts that are there, even when I went to USA, there also I have been participating in discussions, in seminars, and in interfaith groups wherein we discuss how to resolve conflicts in families, in between neighbors, between religions. So in different colleges, in different universities, I go there and we discuss these issues. So I feel that this is a meaningful role that philosophy can play to resolve conflict. And I have found, not trying to say something about myself, but When the others are also trying to do conflict resolution and trying to, play the role of mediators, I found that those of us who are from philosophy are able to play this role in a better way than the others who come over there with the background in theology or science or management. And I have found the feedback from the audience that they say that being a philosopher, by you, what I mean is not necessarily me, even the other philosophers who participate, we are able to handle the conflicts in a better way.
So that would be really a new area, I would say, because it's not only in society, intra-society, but inter-society also, or at international level also we can explore the possibility of conflict resolution, because there are so many conflicts happening around the world between the nations. So there also, I think, this conflict resolution has a big role to play. So definitely it has a very important significance. And as you think that the philosophy person, if the person is having a philosophy background or the proper training in the philosophy, then he definitely plays a better performance in the entire exercise of conflict resolution. Would you like to tell your good days in the department of philosophy, or something about the department? Your memories related to the department?
I have a lot of good memories. In fact, I have all good memories in the department. And what I have found is that while I was in the department, I was always encouraged by my seniors. Whenever I tried to introduce a new course, now the first international seminar that I conducted was on environmental ethics. Now I still remember Dr. Deshpande motivated me. He said that go ahead and you take the lead and you call people. Now I was quite young at that time, but it was a real challenge to me, but I managed it, and it was a real support by him. Similarly, after that also, whenever I tried to introduce new courses, my colleagues, my seniors always supported me. They never looked at me and no, she's quite young and oh, what sort of a course is she trying to talk of? They always encouraged me. And I always got questions from my students. Madam, you're talking about environmental ethics and protecting the environment. Just 2 or 4 students, what changes can we bring out in the society? And let me tell you that those 2 and 4 students whom I have taught have become leaders of different environmental movements.
Great. That's really great achievement. Yeah, there were various stalwarts of philosophy, at least in India, with whom you worked. Actually, you were fortunate to work with scholars like Professor Sundarajan, Professor Barlinge, Professor Marathe. So would you like to tell something about one of them?
See, as far as my interest in environment is concerned, I was always disturbed about environmental issues, and it was Professor Sundarajan who really motivated me into this field. He could see through my uneasiness about environmental values, and he motivated me. Then as far as Professor Marathe is concerned, he really fulfilled my urge to study logic. And Advait philosophy, he really, I was very keen in doing logic, and I found him a real logician who really motivated me into logic, because I was a mathematics student, being a science student. So I was very keen in studying logic. Now coming to Professor Barlinge, I didn't have much interaction with him, but there's one thing I still remember Professor Barlinge for, and that is, he told me, Surjit, why don't you work in philosophy of Sikhism? You are a Sikh, you like doing, why are you shy of working in philosophy of Sikhism? Because my, one senior professor from Punjabi University, when he had come here to Pune to take some viva of a PhD student, he told me, no, you shouldn't work in philosophy of Sikhism, you should work in other areas, because here you won't be able to progress. But Professor Barlinge made me work in philosophy of Sikhism, he motivated me, and I'm really thankful to him. That brought me, that opened venues for me to really speak up and interact at the international forums. It's because of environmental ethics, bioethics, and philosophy of Sikhism that I could attend and participate in international seminars in India and abroad almost every year, minimum 2 to 3 seminars.
That's really interesting, because we were not knowing that Professor Barlinge played a very important role, and as well as Professor Sundarajan also, to shaping your philosophical career. Professor Barlinge was really, the fond of the Indian traditions, because in Department of Philosophy he started appointing the original scholars, like Nyaya. If the Nyaya school is there, then he has got the original traditional scholar of Nyaya and created a special post in the department, and then he started Nyaya courses in the department. Now let us come to your advice to young teachers and the student of philosophy, how they should progress and what would be the challenges for them in coming future.
One challenge that I found towards the end of my career was that we were having a lot of dropouts. And what I found is that we were having students from villages coming up. Due to various reasons, they used to come, they would start the course and they were not able to continue with that course. It used to really upset us, and I think it upsets all of you today also. And then you tend to be a little rude with these students and feel frustrated at times even on oneself, that why is it that we are not able to attract them. But when I went to US, my son is also teaching there in university. So the very first lecture that they were given was, there are a lot of dropouts. So your role is to motivate and make them continue with their studies. Try to understand their situation. With great difficulty, imagine even in the US, if that happens in the US, we can expect it to happen in India. There are students coming from advanced cities like New York who come to study. They have to fight with their parents who want them to be independent. They say, no, we want to study. So they come to study, but after 1 year of study, they find that they are not able to satisfy their parents' needs. Or something which is lacking in motivation, they drop out. So even in the US, if there are dropouts, I think we should expect that there can be dropouts here. And the very first lecture that my son was given was that it was by the dean of the university. She said, I am the dean here, but I was also a dropout.
Okay.
So my request to all you teachers is that motivate these students so that they continue. Similarly, I would advise all of you young teachers that try to understand the difficulties of these students. Don't try to be too rigid with them.
Yes.
What we generally feel is, we have this British attitude. Yes. I wouldn't say anything negative about it, but we have the legacy of the British, that we are not very liberal with the students. I have announced a date for a seminar. You have to come. You've not come, no repetition. In the US, you'll be surprised to know that even exams, my son is conducting exams for students who say I have to go 2 days early. He's going all the way 80 miles just to conduct an exam of 2 students out of a class of 100.
Okay.
And that's what makes you popular amongst the students, that you understand their difficulties. Now think, a student who's got some problem is not able to give the exam. He's a dropout. Here we have students who are having their UPSC exams clashing, their MPSC exams clashing, and we are at times reluctant to change the dates when it is possible for us. There, leave alone changing the dates, separate exams for 2 students are even conducted. So let's learn from them how to motivate students to continue their studies. We must remember, we have students from rural backgrounds, and the harvesting season and so many other difficulties students are facing, financial as well as the others. But what we do is, if the student can afford a mobile, the student's financial condition is not bad. Our way of looking at students is that way. So we need to change this attitude. And most importantly, my advice to young teachers is, try to tell them how philosophy will help them in their daily life. Because if we are not able to relate philosophy to our lives, students will not be interested.
Yeah, that is really a very important advice to all new teachers, because what we think is that we prepare a lot before going to the classes, and the students are not turning up the classes, and then they are not also preparing well. Then we get irritated, or we get annoyed to them. So that is what is not actually going to help in a longer run. So we need to adopt a motherly sort of attitude towards the students, and then trying to understand their situation and their problems as such. Yeah, one more question I would like
And
to.
here I'd even like to add that even when it comes to conducting practicals, at times a re-practical is done for even a single student. Now, wouldn't the teacher become popular with the students? Here,
Definitely.
I have taken my class. After that, my student comes to me, ma'am, I couldn't attend the class. And if the student wants to ask me questions on that class, usually we say, you should have come for the class. I don't have time for you now. But there it's not that way. Secondly, young teachers, I would advise that we should not hesitate to provide reading material to the students. Generally, we tend to think that let the students